Hi, I am going to be talking about my screencast for Unit 15. We were overlooking the weather forecast in Eagle, Alaska, which is located south of Fairbanks, Alaska. A lot of the weather similarities we saw in Fairbanks, we definitely is shown in Eagle as well, especially with the negative weather in January and a little bit more warmer weather in March. So, just looking at the temperature change, it's important to notice that climate will change dramatically. As shown in my readings when I was doing my weather observation in January, the temperature dropped as low as -55 during this time of year. It is not unusual. It is not unusual to get colder temperatures well below into the negatives with little to no cloud coverage at all. So one of the other questions asked for this week's screencast was, based on your analysis, how did the changes in temperature and humidity reflect the change in weather movement of different air masses? Please highlight differences in the variations of dew point and relative humidity. So looking into January again, we definitely see with the dew point temperature being into -10 to -20 throughout the week, and that was the maximum dew point temperature. Our relative humidity stood about from 76 to 75%, and that was for the maximum as well. And it's important to notice that as pressure is higher, we definitely see a spike in dew point temperature, and actually we saw a spike in temperature as well for the air mass. So it does play a huge part where dew point is relatively, there was hardly any dew point temperature or relative humidity. We definitely saw temperature wasn't as high, but the air mass temperature was extremely cold, and that's where we saw between -40 to -50 below an Eagle. And we actually saw about the same readings in Fairbanks as well. So that was a nice little bit of a correlation with that. And now jumping into the month of March, the weather tends to warm up with higher temperature yet very little cloud coverage. During this time frame, light winds were documented by many other students, and we were seeing higher dew point temperatures and higher percentage of relative humidity as well. We're also there compared to January's relative humidity and dew point temperature graph. There are definitely some missing points. It's not because it wasn't recorded, it's just the temperature was little to non-existent. As compared, as shown, we see definitely a dew point temperature. The graph is definitely, you see a lot of dew point temperatures dropping down to as low as 5 degrees on the 25th of March, jumping as high as 25 degrees Fahrenheit on the 30th of March. So that was very interesting. During this time period, we also see that the pressure actually gets down to low as 1,000, and with that temperature being extremely high as well. So that was all very interesting. And then during this time period, the temperature in March is extremely high as well. One of the other questions that seemed to be relatively important to me was the question about how, if the temperatures are warmer than the climatology, does this represent clear skies or cloudy conditions? And with this one, it's a little hard for me to kind of give a correct answer for this one, just because in my observations it showed that there was little to no cloud coverage in January, but in March I didn't have any cloud coverage some of the days that I was doing my observations, or it was really, really light. In Eagle, we definitely see this in March, especially on the day of the 24th. As you can see, there's little to no cloud coverage over Eagle at all, and where Fairbanks is located on this map, there is clear skies, and this was my first day of observations as well, and there were clear skies in Fairbanks, pretty much non-existent, but with the climatology being warmer than the actual temperature, cloud coverage is shown, whereas the climatology being colder, cloud coverage is very low. And actually, I definitely did get very interesting results with that. My climatology was higher than my actual temperature in March, so we didn't see any cloud coverage. So that was pretty interesting. Whereas in January, I did have the climatology is warmer, and there was a little bit of cloud coverage in the month of January, even though the conditions were very cold. So, based on my meteorological conditions that gave rise to colder than expected temperatures in Eagle in late January, suggest that meteorological conditions would give rise to typical temperatures in Eagle in late January. So, it is safe to assume that with the temperature, if someone were to look at the temperature in January for Eagle, we see that it actually, on the 25th, the maximum temperature is -4, with the minimum temperature being -35. But then the temperature on the 29th, we see it's from -35 to -45, and then it jumps back a little bit higher, with maximum being -9 and the minimum being -29, and that definitely happens more towards later in the night as well. So it is kind of safe to assume that you would expect colder days or colder nights and a little bit more warmer weather in the day, with hopes of, the weather turning around over the weekend or so, or during the week. So it isn't really impeccable to expect that it was going to stay -35. Now, if the weather readings in Eagle were definitely -35 on the 25th, -35 on the 29th, and possibly around -30 during on the 31st as well, it would be safe to assume that the weather would be that as throughout the whole week. So it is safe to assume that the weather was looking a little bit hopeful, and we definitely had different pressures going on. Again, the pressure reading from January to February is, we definitely were seeing a little bit higher pressure, and with weather looking really, really, really hopeful, and we actually started seeing a lot more dew point temperature during this time as well, with a little bit more relative humidity. So it is hopeful that the weather would turn around, and it eventually did. In March, the same question follows for March, where we see the weather pretty consistent with 42 degrees, 47 degrees, and 48 degrees Fahrenheit, with minimum temperature ranging from 11 degrees to 29 degrees. And again, a lot of the temperature, with the maximum temperature being in the middle of the day to late afternoon, and then the coldest temperature being early in the morning. So we're definitely seeing a drastic climate change during this time, and it would be safe to assume that the weather would be consistent or persist to get warmer and warmer, rather than colder and colder. So it is safe to assume that the weather would be getting warmer, with the hopes of spring coming around, and obviously with it being May, the weather has turned around. The last question would be, Do winds make a difference in what is happening? And I would agree. So we definitely have the Alaska Range playing a huge part with Eagle. Winds do make a difference in what is happening, and it does make a change. When there are prevailing winds, wind chill factor increases, with the humidity placing a factor on temperature as well. And we definitely see that in not only March, but we definitely see it in January as well. So this is my last screencast, and thank you for a great semester. Bye.